I do the Terror Trail, which is 6:45 outside the Golden Fleece in York. We also do a Ghost Stories night now, which is every Thursday. And we're looking at sort of putting other things into place. My background is script writing and screenplay writing, really, and acting, which I picked up at university
So
for a laugh.
was that your main line of university? Did you go into drama and like acting there, or was that kind of a side project?
I'd actually never really acted before I got to university, and then went along um, to the freshers' play and kind of got. They were pulling parts out of a hat, and I accidentally got Petruchio
Oh,
in
excellent.
Taming of the Shrew, which I remember one of my friends turning around and just sort of like I didn't know who it was, so I was like, "Oh, I got a named part. Maybe I'll get a line." You just turn around and went, "No, no, no, that's the lead." I
Oh
was just
wow.
sitting there for
So,
the rest of the night going, "Oh, Christ."
but that must have been
Um,
pretty amazing because like Lucretia has like possibly the most eloquent lines in that entire play.
he's a right git, but
Yeah.
he's a very well-spoken right git.
I saw Macbeth just last week. Actually, it was last Tuesday. Um, so they've toured from London to West End to Nottingham's main theatre, and it was Macbeth, but it was portrayed as if it was like after a nuclear holocaust. It was after the fall of the world, as it were, and it was the civil war in Scotland. But the story was all played out, but everyone was running around like it was Mad Max, and with that spiked armor and stuff. And actually, I came away from it going that as a spectacle was really really interesting. That was cool, but the
Yeah,
um,
it's good. I do love Macbeth. I played him in I think my second year,
yeah.
um, and yeah, just some of the lines are like out the park amazing. I mean, there's the obvious is the Sadago which I see before me, but I think my favorite one is the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Yes.
You can afford to go really crazy on that one.
Yeah, he's a interested character, conflicted, and he perhaps it's because he comes across as quite believable in that scenario that it works, and it works kind of for every place that you can place a character like Macbeth in. You know, we all see these kind of things where we have conflict and we want to portray a drama, and he just has those beautiful lines and he's playing against his counterparts, and it's just like man, just magic.
Yeah, I love the way that he sort of builds up the idea of the man destroyed by his own power.
Yeah,
Kind of, it's almost a parable in the way he does it. You kind of see that parallel throughout history of people who give everything to gain power and then wind up alone, terrified, and probably dying stabbed by someone else in the back.
well that's it. It's like there's a what do they say? There's no old age on the Serengeti because someone's always out to kill you. It's always out to take your position.
Is yeah, that and British politics.
Of course, yeah, British politics is, I guess, a sore subject for a lot of people at the moment right now. I guess it doesn't really know where it's going. I look at like I have a political interest, but I wouldn't say I'm political. It's mainly because I guess it's almost like a parody of itself these days.
Yeah, I mean the thing is like going back to Terra Trail for a minute, like that doing the research on that gives you an appreciation of how our politics tends to run in circles. Um, like there are some lessons that never seem to get learned,
No, they really don't.
which is actually sort of it comes down to the whole because obviously at the moment we're running through Brexit, which it seems to me like we've seen that rhetoric before so many times of isolationism being the best way and you can't trust those people over there.
Yeah.
And the only chance that historically we have ever had is when we band together. I mean, it was true in World War II, where we were on the losing side until we banded together with America. I mean, it's been true just throughout history. The Roman Empire is admittedly one of conquering, but also there are numerous times when their diplomacy was what won them
You're
their
right.
power. I mean, you look at how York was founded. Um, that was basically the Romans showing up, finding a situation where war had broken out, and brokering a deal with the local queen.
So does that play? I've done your story, but in terms of say listen to listeners and viewers, so how does that play into your terror trial? Because you include a lot of different elements. Because I can remember the trial that we took on takes us like down little dark alleyways to the minister itself, And so there's lots of different stories stitched together, and also local stories I found with that as well. And that was very different compared to, say, the ghost stories that you hear about. So,
Yeah, I
what
mean,
what what made you choose history and terror and murder as opposed to ghost stories, which I guess are the penny?
there's the thing is with a ghost story, there's um, always this level of disconnect between the person it's happening to and you. Because if you want with a ghost story, you can just turn around and go, "Nah, it didn't happen." Like you can choose to not believe a ghost story. You can choose to say, "I don't think that happened because I don't believe in ghosts," or "I don't believe that they appear that way." It's very much more down to interpretation than something like historical fact, which is admittedly a lot of it is opinion because it's written by people at the time, and you have to pick up on what they said. But it's the plausibility factor. You know, we know that there was a battle at Agincourt. We know
Yes.
people fought in it. We know people died in it. We don't know 100% how many, or what the sizes of the armies were on either side, but it is not unreasonable to say that those people who suffered and died in the battle were scared and were their experience was real. And that's sort of the thing with Terror Trail, is that the reason I went for history and terror as the focus is that the things that we talk about happened, and you can put yourself in the position of the people who suffered, and there isn't a get out clause for that. You can't just turn around and go, "Oh, I don't believe that Guy Fawkes was killed." He was.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, he killed himself, but there's no disconnect. There's no way to say that people aren't murdered or tortured or abused, and like it's also a thing that carries through right to today because it's still happening.
Yes.
Like, there are places in the world that you just don't go without a gun
No,
or
you're
without a lot of people with guns.
gonna get killed.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, like, we we get this sort of bubble, I think, living in Western democracy, where we kind of think that certain things just couldn't possibly happen. Like, my degree was in criminology at university, and I remember looking through like the history of the stuff that was happening, and just sitting there like they don't still do this, do they?
Yeah.
That's not possible. But it does. And that lack of protection to be able to say, "Oh, I don't believe in it," when it's factually real, it's scarier, I think, uh, than ghosts.
Yeah, I
I
think
certainly find it scarier than ghosts.
yeah, there's a difference, isn't there? There's the reality of things that people can actually walk away and go, I can believe they happened because I can go to a history book and actually read about it and I can understand it and I can take knowledge away from it. As with the ghost story, I say it's down to interpretation. People like to be scared, but I guess that only fulfills perhaps a certain number of people. Whether they want to get spooked or they want to have a thrill, or they just want to hear a spooky story, which I guess we all want to do when there's fire. But when the story and the terror is real, there's a different texture to what it is that's being told, and particularly when you're very eloquent with it, it's like it adds an extra layer to the receiving end as a person who's receiving it, going, this is good.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a thing that does keep cropping up. It's something I actually make a mention of in the tourist, that when you tell a history story, you almost have the opposite job to a ghost walk. Um, in that with ghost stories, you have to work to make them scary. You have to put on the character. You have to lay out the atmosphere. You have to make people believe that these things happen in the dark, and you have to make people you have to make them scared. Whereas when you're talking about, for instance, one of the stories we tell is Margaret Clitheroe, and this is a woman who was physically killed in front of her own children. You have the opposite job. You have to soften that blow down to a story that people can digest, because the idea of something like that happening is very real, very immediate, and very, very, very nasty.
That's an interesting point actually. It's like the reverse storytelling. You have to soften it for the audience as opposed to making it hard for them to
Mm.
digest. That's an interesting way of explaining that actually.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do make a mention of it because sorry, my dog is going completely bonkers in the back garden at the moment.
No, you're fine.
But yeah, something I always say on the tour is that I do dress up and act the clown, um, which I think is something you have to do until it's a story where you shouldn't do it.
Is that because
Um,
you want to that they can see that you're in theatre?
I think I I think it depends on the story. There are some. For me, it's not necessarily about uh, showing people I'm an actor. It's as much as it's about conveying the right emotion to them, because history is uh, history is something that is experienced emotionally in a big way. The ability to identify with another person is a huge part of looking at history.
Nice.
And I think if you don't hit the right tone, you can ruin the story.
No, that's a good storytelling lesson there. In fact, you have to hit the right note, and you have to give them the right setting, even just a visual cue, and that all ties together.
Yeah, I mean, also, I mean, there is another sort of factor to history I've always thought, which I find it incredibly important as a subject. Um, it it has a lot more meaning for me than stories or sort of ghost stories, fictions, that kind of thing, because it's important to remember what happened. Because if you don't, it can happen again.
Yeah, you're right. Certain lessons I don't think have been learned from history, or we choose not to learn from them because, whether it be politically or whether it be the motivations that go into it, don't want us to remember that and want certain things to come into effect or re-effect again, which is
Yeah, I
it's a
mean, like
worrying
there
thing
are
in
there are
itself.
huge portions of our own history that we just completely ignore. Like the actions that the British took in the Boer War, for instance, really don't get
No,
talked about
absolutely.
that much in history lessons. I certainly never learned about it at my history courses, and I was when I was at secondary school or anything.
No, I didn't.
And
Because
yet, it was a hugely important war, particularly for Africa, um, because it kind of well, it did immeasurable damage to the north of Africa. And well, for instance, right, the British had their own concentration camps in the Boer War.
we did, and the same as Tanzania as well.
Yeah, and like no one, well, very few people who haven't sort of physically gone and researched it actually know that. Like if I turn around and say that to an audience full of people, I'd reckon about 10% of the people who come along actually go, ah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
half
true.
the time they're not English.
That's an interesting parable. Like I said, I mentioned Tanzania because just like last week, there was the conversation that's now cropped up into the mainstream press about that there are is it 10% of the or 12% of the UK population doesn't believe that the Holocaust existed, and it
Oh
was like,
God.
well, we also there's lots of different places around the world where we have used concentrated death as a form of terror on its own people, such as like there's the Boer War in Tanzania, where we literally the last culture to commit actual genocide and completely wipe out the opposite side actually was Britain back in 1912.
Yeah, and it's I did actually get somebody in the pub. They didn't come on the tour. Who was a Holocaust denier. And of course, one of the stories we tell is that of an actual pogrom that happened in York uh, to I think about 100. Well, no, we know the final tally was 150 people in Clifford's Tower, but we have no way of telling how many hundreds or even thousands of people were killed in the actual riots before that.
So what was the
So I was
situation
sort of
like there?
sitting there opposite this guy, and I said, "Oh, this happened," and I said, "Well, it's like the Holocaust," and he said, "Well, proof that occurred." And I was just like, "Sorry, did did you think those millions of people just fucking disappeared?" Like,
Yeah, I want you to talk to me about the Bolsheviks and the communist regime of obviously the early 1900s under Stalin and Mao, and people are going, millions of people died. I'm like, yeah.
yeah, it's like it is a tradition throughout history that the people in power will always try and eradicate any evidence of the bad stuff they did, um, which is just sort of colonialism in the way it has to work. Because the minute you turn or you show people the reality of what what warfare and conquest is, it becomes suddenly very unpalatable to be an empire.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
There you go. So that was the light-hearted tour that we take people on.
No, it's good. I mean, I seem to remember there was a particular time on your tour that we were down an alleyway, and so I was a bit like, it was really. I think you spoke about a lady who had died in a house. It might have been what you alluded to earlier, and I can't remember what her name was. And I actually thought that was perhaps the most blood wrenching part of the story. Actually, it was quite a dark, depraved story. How she'll have to allude to me what it was. How I think someone had broken into her house and they'd had her killed. I think a child too. And there was
Oh, the break into the house is actually part of the Jewish massacre story. That was
okay.
the family of Benedict, who was he was one of the Jews who went down to see the coronation of Richard the Lionheart, um, and basically his family were left up in York, um, and there were a group of Crusader knights who owed him a lot of money. Um, Broke into his house and basically burned his family alive inside the house, um, which was it. It was the start of basically the whole pogrom in York. Was that fire? Sort of the inciting incident, if you will.
How long
Yeah.
have you been running the Terror Trail anyway? How long has it been up?
What are we on now? 2019, so probably about 8 years.
Okay. So has there been a lot of people who come on a regular basis? Then is it a regular, profitable business?
You do see repeat faces. I think it's like refresher courses, but like yeah, people come back, and it is one of those things that it's gone through its ups and downs, definitely, um, because of just seasonal trade. But
Sure.
we always tried to push things further than just a city tour with the sort of plays and the theatrical events that we did, which that some of them worked, some of them didn't, and I think um, I think it's all like it's a continual drive for me that I'd get bored if I just do the same thing over and over. So I take risks.
No, risk is good because that's how you judge what you need to stretch to. Because when you see that I don't quite like this or this doesn't appear to work this time, I can reevaluate that and try something new. And if it does work, I'll get that immediate feedback and I can continue doing it. And if not, we'll slide back into how we were before. And I think people are afraid to take risks because they get complacent. I think, and it speaks volumes that you want to try something new.
Yeah, well, I think it's I think again part of that whole sort of history drive is if you just get stuck doing the same thing, then why bother? Because it's very easy if you're doing something, God knows how many times a week, to let it get stale, and I never want that to happen. So a lot of the stuff um, I do to keep things fresh, and to make sure that it's always sort of enjoyable for me. Because if I'm not enjoying myself on the street, then nobody else in the audience is going to.
Well, yeah, because they're there to see you, and if they see you running through the same script or the same mentality or the same, if they've seen you before, that they'll know that it's just boring. Or you're just the same, telling the same story. And I guess when you talk about it from a historical point of view, you can feel that palette of reality when you talk, and that carries over, as where like you said, I guess the most comparable thing, of course, is a ghost tour, which it might not be. It's just a fantasy story for many people. As well with history, it's very real, and then that helps keep it fresh a bit because the reality of it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is one of the reasons we started doing a ghost story night, was because I finally found enough stuff to actually do interesting things with. Because I never just like doing a ghost story. I like doing a story that's got a twist to it.
Yeah,
Um,
likewise.
Sorry?
I was going to say likewise. I like
Yeah.
I like to know there's some depth or there's some teeth in it, and perhaps like yourself, I really get frustrated. I never want to be the person who does exactly what everyone else has done. I've had opportunities to write books and write stories, like articles, but if I'm just writing about the same stuff that's been written before, I'm not adding to the conversation. I'm just repeating.
Yeah, which is it's just wrong. It's not how it should work.
Yes,
Definitely.
I always try to so my own works, so my own like documentaries and my films. I try to find something that's actually new, that there's a twist, there's a layer that has not been added before, and then if someone comes along and sees mine, they'll go, ah, okay, let's add to that conversation as well. And instead of
Yeah.
repeating, add to. It's actually it's actually done me out of a job a few times. I have to say, just where I was, just visit, go read this guy's book and take his details. I'm like, no, that's his book's already out there. Why would I want to make a diluted version of that into a small column when I actually need to add to that?
Yeah, that's I don't know. It's an easy way to get staid and boring.
It is, and when I look at the internet, that's kind of what I see. They're just recycled stories.
Yeah, actually, if you look at like modern news, I think it's one of my favorite shows. Actually, is people like John Oliver and The Daily Show and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what they did like a couple of times now is to show the continuing narratives that get put out across news channels,
Okay.
like where people use the same stock phrases over and over and over.
Yeah, because I guess they're owned by the same companies, and I guess they put out a standard script, and that's then recycled and resaid.
Yeah, it would be unfortunate if everything went that way, because then you'd wind up with some very boring movies.
I think you do find that in the newspapers as well. I mean, there's the story that is the media really owned by six companies, and when you start breaking it down, you start realizing, yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah, yeah, that's always actually, yeah, looking at corporate landscapes is always terrifying.
So in Nottingham, I guess it's like there is in York. There's your kind of like city newspaper, and a few years ago, the Nottingham Post was bought out by the Mirror. It's national narratives now, that are recycled out from through the mainstream press. So the same ideas come from same corporate oligarchs into the papers, and the papers filter down into the smaller people. And you're thinking, so where's the local news? Where's the real information? Where do I have to go and find this? And I think that's led into the reason why people are looking at alternative news, because they're finding news that actually is real.
Yeah, and like I think this actually sort of comes through to like local politics and stuff, because you go back a few years, most people knew who their representative was in the vote, and this is sort of like I reckon young people get disillusioned with politics so easily because all they ever see is the national figure and never actually get to see someone who affects them on a
Yeah,
local level.
that's an interesting point, actually. Yeah, I bet that's actually quite true. People don't know who their MP is, let alone what they do. And if they were to go and ask them, potentially they might just start screaming at the sky to them, as opposed to having a constructive narrative with them.
Yeah, I mean this is the sort of nature now with British politics, and it's one reason I think that that Brexit did so well, and why that whole thing about people are tired of experts. Do you remember when that quote came out?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's sort of part of it is that everything was centered around London and has been for so long, and all the money has been poured into it for so long that people, for instance, in the old mining communities up north, feel neglected.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And because nobody really knows who to take those problems to, um, they just haven't been raised in Parliament in so long that they're out of touch with what people really want to see and how people work. And then you get someone like Mary Black who comes in and just goes, actually, no.
Yeah, that adds that kind of like, wow, this person does know what they're talking about. I mean, talking of politics, I saw like there's debates now over the HS3 line, which is I think it's to go from Liverpool across country, and I think through York actually, and that's instantly getting downvoted and dismayed because of the debacle of a HS2, which is a completely different project.
Hmm. I haven't seen any of these actually, but
Well,
I
and
think
I'm only aware of that. It pops up on my newsfeed every so often. I think they're trying to create because otherwise, I think if you have to go cross country, there is no actual direct lines. You have to get in and out the main city hubs, and they want a kind of direct line from east to west.
yeah. I mean, yeah, actually, that would be nice. But if you're not going to sort of consult with people on the railway that's going to be going across their property, I'd imagine that's not too popular.
No, no. I mean, these days, I guess people are so. It's my place, it's my property. It's very much a different feeling to how it was perhaps at one time when it was nationalised. It was a case, no, we're going to build this across here for industry and commerce. And everyone's like, yay! And now it's like, oh, no, it's my house.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because the days of the industrialist are sadly numbered. Because that's the problem with all the sort of inherited wealth
Yeah.
that goes on in big money is that you wind up with a group of people who aren't perhaps as skilled as the great businessmen who started off the industrial age. Um, I shudder to think what it would have been like if you'd had the likes of Donald Trump attempting to start up British Rail.
That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? That actually, I can almost see that as a parody play, Just
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that because, like, admittedly, as not nice a person as he was, Henry Ford was an incredible businessman. He had skill and intelligence, and yes, he was ruthless, and yes, he was quite racist in places, but he was very, very good at what he did. And now it just seems that we have people who have more money than sense, and like don't even have the excuse that they're very good at what they do.
yeah, that's a really interesting point you make there. I guess that people have inherited wealth. There's fortunes and organisations and corporations which are an entirely new entity, really, that have entered the paradigm, say, from 100 years ago. They didn't really exist in the way they do today, and now they have so much mass and control because they own so much that it really doesn't kind of work too well. If someone wants to take over, he doesn't have the same vision or ambition, but also the same kind of connection to the people.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's kind of weird to think that I saw it recently. It was a sort of statistical analysis thing, and it was that like the gap between the richest and the poorest has never been this big.
Yeah, I've seen that too. And
And you sort of think, well, I mean, like that whole sort of social mobility thing. I know it didn't happen a lot in the Victorian age, but it did start to happen. That whole thing of new money cropping up, which gave people that sort of, yes, we're rich now, but we didn't used to be. You know,
that's right. Yeah.
um, the sort of advent of those industrialist kind of people. It's not there anymore. So what we've essentially got is a new aristocracy, and that never really goes down well.
No, there's certainly a strange resentment that appears to be happening with people. I was one of my friends shared a story to me via the world of social media, and it was this place in I think it's in Norwich where it's a factory that also operates as a dormitory hotel. So everyone who works in the factory has a place in this dormitory. And I was like, isn't that just a straight reflection of like the workhouses that you're effectively paying, you're working to live there?
Jesus, yeah.
And when you see that, and that's kind of like the standard across like China as well. You're going, okay, oh, are we approaching? Are we reapproaching that? You that work level where you have to put so much into it just to get a way to live.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if history holds true, then the next thing you get is people fighting back. And I
Yeah,
mean, there are a number of ways they do it historically, but one of them, unfortunately, is nationalism. Um, I mean, this is the problem: is that a lot of the circumstances which brought about the rise of the Nazi Party in like the 30s and the 20s came about because Germany was pushed into so much poverty by, well, things like the Treaty of Versailles and the
yes.
repayments they had to pay, which has made Germany so poor that they didn't feel they had another choice.
No.
And like you had the Weimar Republic trying its best to come back, but then you had this other big shouty bloke who turned around and said, "No, we're going to make Germany great again." And
I am aware that again my knowledge of it is not detailed or anything, but I'm aware that he created a currency that wasn't backed by central money. It was created off the national wealth. So everyone had a lot of money again to spend, and of course they spent that in their war machine.
Yeah, it's the rhetoric that's always the same.
Yes.
It's things are hard, so we'll create an enemy to fight. Those people over there are different than us. If we fight them, we'll be all right.
And it's so funny you say that. I guess we've diversified, but actually we're talking about the same thing. This is terror. In propagation, you have to demonize them, and we're great, and that's how you put them down to your own people. It's a propaganda system, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something you tend to see a lot in, like, for instance, people who equate all Muslims to being terrorists.
Yeah.
When I've, I have had, in fact, I still have a large number of friends who are Muslims who wouldn't think at all about ever harming another person. And it's in the same way that, like, Christianity's teachings have elements of violence to them. In the Bible, certainly a lot of people get killed in the Old Testament. Um, the same sort of thing occurs in the Quran, but you don't have to take that literally. That's a choice on the part of the person.
Yeah, I think the
And yet there
difference
are
there
people
is.
out there who seem to believe that every single person who worships that faith must be evil by necessity.
No, I get that. I understand why people would say that as well. But I guess the difference is it's fundamentalism. How far do you take that utter belief? I mean, I only say that from the experience I've had with where I work. I work in the most diverse multicultural place in Nottingham, and I see the conflicts between people on a daily basis, from between Russians, between Kosovans, Serbians, Croatians, situations between Polish, English, Muslim, Indian, and there's this strange kind of everyone kind of gets on for the sake of it. There's this underlying hatred between people, and it's really quite interesting to watch.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that kind of hatred of the other is a very useful tool if you happen to be a very rich minority.
Yeah,
Because if you think about all of the rhetoric that gets bandied about in government about how immigrants are harming us and how all these people coming over here stealing our jobs is quite a commonly used phrase. Whereas if you look at the reality of it, immigrants add to our economy. They're very good for it, just based on the numbers. Very, very, very few people come over here to benefit scrounge. Indeed, even amongst the poor people, the amount of our actual spending that goes on taking care of people who are committing benefit fraud, which sort of it comes into that same pool of people, the people who are not rich, basically. But you need to divide those people up, because if you don't, and they all realize that all the money is with 1% of the population, then they start to get pissed off about that and look at where all the money's really going, which is things like the fact that Starbucks hasn't paid any tax
I know.
for like the last 5 years.
And that's the same as his corporations we're talking about. It's like whether that be Google or whether that be Amazon. As two prime examples, the guy who runs like Sports Direct, it's all kept in offshore accounts, so there's no accounting that has to be done here. So you're taking money out of the economy, cycling it elsewhere that will never filter back in, and that's causing the exacerbation of wages and poverty.
Yeah, and I mean, it's actually, in the end, it's what will kill capitalism. Because once you've made all the money, there's no more money to spend on the things that you're making.
Yeah, you got no customers because they can't buy anything.
Yeah.
They can't buy that £8 coffee. I mean, who'd
Oh
have
God,
thought
they haven't made an £8 coffee, have they?
it's like £7.95.
Oh, I'm out. I've had enough.
I no, it's the reason I don't choose to go there anymore. I'll just buy a nice coffee. Got some coffee beans. Got a coffee filter here. I'll make my own, thanks. It's a hard sell, I bet, as well. But people they want to be associated with the brand and will go. I will keep buying.
Yeah,
It's weird. Why would you want to spend like £6, £8 on a cup of coffee, which to them probably cost them absolute pittance?
yeah. It's It's part of the whole ridiculousness of the brand culture. You know, you're not selling the coffee, you're selling the name.
It makes me think. You know how we're just talking about like different cultures and different strategies and different corporations. It's almost like a revival of tribalism. People want to be tribal towards their brand now.
Yeah, there's a certain there's a huge number of studies on it by social scientists about the ways that you other through performing your identity, um, and like you create these sort of like it was like I don't notice it as much these days, but you know the sort of chav culture that cropped up.
Yeah,
It's still sort of here a bit, but not in the same way as the whole council house kind of thing was in like the 90s, because it was a big thing in like the media, wasn't it?
it was. Yeah,
And like you had people constructing their entire identities around the kind of clothes that they bought and the kind of music that they bought and the you know the interests you take kind of define who you are. And like branding, if you can jump on top of being like the face of that thing, is a great way to sell product.
that's not. We're wearing
And
this Adidas tracksuit and some Nike trainers.
yep, yep.
It's interesting because I got a friend who lives in LA, and she said that she's a chav, and like my instant thought goes to that. It's like the person who wears like the Adidas cap and the baseball jacket. It's like no, it's because we're rich and have like cars, but we're only like 17. And it's like what? Because we really do have that, and it's interesting because over here it's almost like you're mocking that you have the brand, but you don't have everything. You're still kind of in a poor position, but you have these things of value. You'll have like gold rings, or you'll have like a gold necklace and the Adidas tracksuit that must have cost you 60 quid.
Mm.
It's like showing that you are a brand billboard, but actually, in reality, you don't have that much. That's where the LA one she was describing to me. Actually, the chav is a reference to the fact that no, we do have this and we boast of it. A bit like the the Real Housewives of LA and New York and stuff.
Yeah, and there's like that whole sort of almost vulgarity that comes with it, which I suppose is the sort of flip side of the culture is having cultural capitals, the other way of making yourself more valuable. Because there's like you know the sort of consumerist culture tends to be amongst the working and middle classes, whereas it's very much a thing that the upper classes use to cut people out. Has always been that sort of learning and that cultural thing. Oh, have you read Dickens? Have you read this and that? Have you experienced this particular opera? Do you know how to hold the fork the right way? And that was always their
Yeah.
inherited way of doing things, of adding value to themselves. And it's like a sort of counter to that now is people just buying immense amounts of wealthy looking stuff to go, yeah, I'm rich too, and I don't care.
It's like you said, I'm buying rich-looking stuff. I wonder if that's what's led to the kind of counterfeit revolution that there is. Everyone wearing like, faux Calvin Klein.
Yeah.
They love wearing the false product as if that actually is a brand in itself. I'm wearing the counterculture to that product.
Yeah. Which of course you now see sort of the reaction to, don't you? Because a lot of people go back to the sort of ripped jean look.
Yeah, it's true. Everyone does that. I think it's what you see in like the patterns of people recycling again.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just being attacked by my dog. I think she needs to go out for a walk. Um,
Okay, man. So should we round up your Terror Trail chapter then? So, if people wanted to find out more about your York Terror Trail, where can they go to find that information and what's it about?
well, we've got the Terror Trail website, which is yorkterrortrail.co.uk, or we've got the Facebook page, which is York Terror Trail Nightshade Productions.
Okay, so people can go there and find out what your trail is, what time it starts, how long it goes for, is that kind of thing.
Yeah, and they can keep up with all the other stuff we do as well, like the plays and the murder mystery nights. Looking at the moment at trying to put together a TV series pilot, which is about history. A Kickstarter, hopefully sometime later on this year, if not a little bit into the next one. And yeah, that'll all be on the Facebook and the website as well.
Okay, so I'll make sure that So in terms of how this appears on screen for our viewers, it kind of has like myself on the left, yourself on the right, and obviously our details underneath respectively. So I'll make sure I add those details to that page when it goes out public. So Damien, it's a fantastic conversation. We've kind of covered a lot, really. So fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on, having a chat, and I'm sure we're going to catch up soon as it is. So.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, dude. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join me here today. I really do appreciate it. But if I could just ask one more thing of you, you could just press like, dislike, leave a comment, or press subscribe. You could do any on all of those things, but it allows me to know whether I'm producing the kind of content that you want to listen to. I do produce a variety of content, especially on YouTube and out into the world of social media. So please, if you would, thank you very much. I'm Kristian Lander. Until next time.